I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land.
Considered possibly the greatest African speech ever, former South Africa President Thabo Mbeki's words have inspired a nation and its people.
I'm born of a people who are heroes and heroines. I am born of a people who would not tolerate oppression. I am of a nation that would not allow that fear of death, of torture, of imprisonment, of exile, or persecution should result in the perpetuation of injustice.
From its eloquent prose and good works,
the 2010 FIFA World Cup will be organized in South Africa,
to his most controversial ones. In this edition of African Presidents, His Excellency provides the Africa Channel with a rare and exclusive interview.
Sir, we will have you sit right here.
All right. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
The great masses who are our mother and father will not permit that the behavior of the few results in the description of our country and people as barbaric. Patient, because history is on their side. These masses do not despair because today the weather is bad. Nor do they turn triumphalists when tomorrow the sun shines. Whatever the circumstances they've lived through, and because of that experience, they are determined to define for themselves who they are and who they should be. As an African, this is an achievement of which I am proud. Proud without reservation and proud without any feeling of conceit. Today, it feels good to be an African.
Your speech, I am an African, is quoted and referenced so many times. It's also been hailed as perhaps the greatest African speech ever. How is it regarded among Africans today?
Well, I mean, from what I hear, from what I know, it's true. I mean, a lot of people find it very inspiring. It very much affirms our identity as Africans. Defines who we are, and communicates a message also about what we're capable of. That, you know, looking at the South African situation, that out of this major disaster that was the apartheid system, as Africans we said this must end, and it ended, and said what is it that we put in its place? And we defined that. And as you know, the speech was made in the context of the adoption of the Constitution. And therefore that these things that are contained in this Constitution about non-racialism, about gender equality, a non-sexist society, a democratic society, human rights, and a society that attends to the matter of the development of the individual and all these things, that all of these were African products, and therefore that as Africans we were making a statement that indeed we are proud to be African, contrary to what might have been said by others in the past who saw Africans as a failure. That we're proudly African, and we could demonstrate why.
A bit aloof at times, but prophetic in his message, His Excellency Thabo Mbeki speaks little about his childhood, being the son of communist pioneers in Transkei, his early years as an ANC militant, or his 28 years of exile in London or Moscow, returning to South Africa only after the release of Nelson Mandela. Today, what he speaks most about, though, is his passion for the country he would go on to serve as president for nearly 2 terms, and the progress of the continent he loves and defends.
The image that people have about the continent is an old image. It's an image of an Africa that has passed. It's not an image about Africa today. Essentially, the bulk of the continent has transformed itself into a democratic continent. The majority of the African countries are today democratic countries, with great determination by the African people to ensure that they sustain and entrench those democracies. That the bulk of Africa is at peace. Yes, indeed, there are areas of conflict still, as we see currently in Libya and Cote d'Ivoire, and Eastern Congo, Somalia. There are these pockets, but that the bulk of the continent is a continent that is at peace with itself.
What sparked this call for democracy? What happened all of a sudden that now we're hearing about these countries that are making the fight for democracy?
I think that what happened in North Africa took everybody by surprise, including the North Africans. But I think that it really is based on the fact that if you look at the rest of the continent had moved away from this period of people who stay in government for many decades, not necessarily because they were properly elected, but through repression and use of other means. And I think this communicated a message to the Africans in the North that why are we allowing this kind of thing to continue in the North, whereas the rest of the continent is changing. The timing of it, the form it took, and so on, I think took all of us by surprise. But clearly, I think you couldn't sustain the situation as in Egypt, for instance, where you'd had President Mubarak as president of Egypt for over 30 years, on the basis of fraudulent electoral processes. If it was on the basis of ordinary free and fair elections, that would be okay. You would not have had an uprising. But I think that inspired by what was happening in the rest of the continent, the North Africans said, why are we allowing this thing? You've had in Egypt, as I say, President Mubarak there for over 30 years, Ben Ali in Tunisia for over 20 years, Libya for 40 years. That really the time had come to change the situation. So it was in that sense a continuation of the process of the democratization of the whole of the continent.
Coming up, President Mbeki talks about an African renaissance and helps broker peace between North and South Sudan.
You popularized the phrase African Renaissance. Is that what we're seeing now? Talk about your meaning behind it.
I think so. I think all of these things that we're talking about, the Renaissance is a rebirth. And it's a rebirth of the continent away from conflict, away from dictatorship and authoritarian rule, away from poverty, away from development. And I think that the African continent is very much in the process of that rebirth. And I'd hope that as part of that, it would also mean a restructuring of the relations between the continent and the rest of the world. So that you move away from a situation in which people had an attitude towards the continent that It is a hopeless continent.